All right, so welcome back to another episode of the IMG series. Today, I'm really excited because I have Dr. Maureen here, who is actually Filipino IMG. She was born and raised here in America, but did her medical education in the Philippines. But of course, I'm not going to be responsible for telling you all about her because she has so much to share and so much to say about her experience as an IMG. So I would like to welcome Maureen to today's episode. Thank you for joining me.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Of course. So Maureen and I were just talking. So I'll start with the usual questions I ask every guest on here. So first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are now in your career and what you're doing so far.
Okay, so like you said, I was born here. I was half and half. So I was raised half in the Philippines, half here in the US. But I mostly associate myself as being Filipino. I speak Tagalog perfectly well. I know I get excited every time I see fellow Filipinos in the hospital or anywhere else. I always tell like my co-interns or co-residents that I can't help myself, even with the nurses. Every time I see someone Filipino, I'm like, "Are you Filipino?" I am too.
I love that.
Because it's just fun. Yeah, because it's just so fun to have someone from the same country be in the same workplace as you, because like the culture is there. But yeah, so I'm currently a PGY2 pediatric resident at the University of Texas Medical Branch. Currently inching my way to my last year of residency, but I plan to do fellowships, so hopefully I get in.
That's exciting. And I can definitely relate to what you just said. When I did observerships here in the US, I would kind of look for Filipinos around in the community. And it's so funny because when I did my observerships at the time, I was doing surgery observerships, and the OR nurses, for whatever reason, they found out somebody in from the Philippines is here, and one nurse came to the OR, and then she kind of just barged in and said something in Tagalog, and then she was just asking me how I was and blah blah blah. It's like we knew each other, and it's just a different feeling. So I know exactly what you mean. Okay, so this is probably a silly question, but not just why you decided to pursue the USMLEs, but why you got to medicine in the first place is probably the more appropriate question.
Okay, this feels like an interview for Match,
Oh, no.
but because we typically ask those same questions. And I remember when that question was raised when I was doing my interviews prior to residency, my main answer was both my parents are doctors. So my mom and dad both did their medical education or took medicine in UE, and that's how I ended up there. But yeah, so they're the reasons why I chose medicine, because I've always been exposed to it. I'm bad in math. I've always tell people this. I'm bad in math, so I couldn't do accounting. I couldn't do anything with numbers in it. And then I'm also very bad when it comes to drawing or like picturing things. So I was like, well, I can't be an engineer or an architect. That's out of the picture. So because of my parents and because of how I was exposed to medicine at an early age, that's how I ended up choosing medicine. Plus, I always loved science. Like science was one of my strongest subjects ever since I was a kid. And so I was like, well, maybe, medicine is going to be all science. That's fun, which is a lie. There's so much math involved in medicine, by the way. But yeah, so I that's how I ended up doing medicine or taking up medicine. I basically it's kind of like that's the only profession or that's the only track that I knew growing up. And then I ended up wanting to do residency in the US, mostly because my family here. And then a part of me, like while I was doing clerkship in the Philippines, because I never did internship in the Philippines, while I was doing my clerkship, I noticed how there were so much things that we were kind of behind in terms of like how we run like the hospitals, how we run our healthcare system. And then so that was one of the reasons why I chose to do USMLE and do residency here, because I wanted a more progressive healthcare system. And then at the same time, I wanted a system that wasn't so stringent with the hierarchical system. Because you know how in the Philippines it's like, oh, you're an intern or you're a clerk, and then you have the intern, and then nobody ever seems to talk to each other as if they were on the same level. And so that's why I was like, maybe I should just like do residency in the States. And plus, like, I love how evidence-based everything is here and how everyone um, like does their management or thinks about management and plans based on researches and also based on like the articles that they read. I think it's because we have more access to like up to date or like the journals here versus if I were or if I had stayed in the Philippines.
Yeah, can I just like, I love that you brought up the whole hierarchy in the Philippines because
Mhm.
it, as somebody who like grew up there, it's something that you think it's like something you know and you're used to, but when you come to a place like America, for example, and then see that it's okay to not fear your superior and instead, you know, feel like you can talk to them, you can ask them questions without, you know, being scared whether or not you're being respectful or disrespectful. And I completely agree with you. That's one of the things that I also noticed when I did not just like medicine, but just being in the Philippines, is that you always kind of have to almost fear your superior. So
Yeah.
it's hard to find a good mentor
Mm.
when you're in the Philippines, because it's like you get intimidated and you're not even allowed. The whole first name basis isn't a thing,
Yes.
does not exist in the Philippines.
So
Otherwise,
that was one of the biggest things. So like during my first week of residency, I remember as an intern, I was so scared because I was like, oh crap, like it's been a while since I actually have been in the hospital. And so I referred to everyone as like, because in the Philippines, you're used to calling everyone with like a miss or a mister before
yes.
their names. I was like, even the nurses, I'd be like, hey, miss this, can I get this? And they're like, why are you calling me that? Like, you could just call me by my first name. I'm like, oh, that was cringeworthy because I was like, oh, they probably would beat me up if I just like said their first name.
Yeah,
And then even the attending, so the attendings, I was so scared of them in the beginning because I was like, I don't know how they are over here.
right.
So I remember I would always refer to like one of the scariest attendings in our hospital. I mean, really, he's not that scary, but just the impression. I would refer to him as, hey, Dr. Blank, like, do you want me to
Right.
get this? And he's like, you and I are both on the same level. You
Exactly.
have an MD at the end of your name. I have an MD at the end of my name. You should just refer to me as this, like basically the first name. Cause I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. But I guess like to not to like not to to hate or not to say anything bad about like how it is in the Philippines. I think it's just the culture.
Yes.
People here are more used to just being all on the same level versus in the Philippines. I think we're so respectful that we carry it on with our job where we refer to everyone as, oh, he's higher than me because he's older than me. And so there's that fear that if you're not respectful to them by using certain terms, then you're a bad person. So
Exactly. So aside from those differences that you mentioned, um, how else do you think training, since you're now doing residency, how would you kind of compare the medical system or the healthcare system here in the US to what you were exposed to in the Philippines?
so I mean, I only did my like clerkship in UE, and then we were able to go to like different hospital, meaning like I think I did my OB rotation in Carino Memorial Medical Center, which is still
Same.
like a yeah, which oh God, that hospital, oh, so tiring. It was so exhausting. Um, it was still a public hospital, and I think that's the only area where I can compare like my experience with, because I know some of my friends are in private hospitals right now, and they say it's entirely different from how we did it in med school. But like, if I were to compare other things, I feel like the distribution of job. So I think me being a clerk in the Philippines when I was a medical student and being in a public hospital, we were at the bottom of the food chain. Like we
Oh,
did
yes.
from measuring pee in a cup and like draining that pee bag or urine bag. And then from cleaning that colostomy bag, we did everything. And I feel like now that I'm a resident, I don't know if it's because I'm a resident right now versus when I was a medical student, but I feel like there's more help that I'm getting right now. And I have the power to actually kind of like distribute the job, like be like, hey, I'm a resident, I do this, can you do this for me? Like for example, the
Right.
nurses for us, like in the hospital, the nurses are really in charge of putting an IV in for a patient because we're busy putting in orders and also talking to our attendings, trying to figure out what the management or plan is. It's basically like the little things that I had done as a clerk. I don't have to do it anymore as a resident. So, I mean, that's the only thing, but I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how it is being a resident in the Philippines. Maybe it's a lot better too. Um, but talking to my friends from the Philippines too. So one of them, I constantly talk to him. He's one of my good friends, and he's actually doing his internal medicine residency in a private hospital, which is a really good hospital too. So we were talking. One of the things that was a big difference, or one big difference between the U.S. and the Philippines, obviously, is that we are equipped with an EMR system. Basically, everything is electronic. We don't have to write anything, and we don't have to like figure out handwriting from people who don't have good handwriting. So that's one of the differences. Like it's a lot easier for us to access medical records if they were seen outside the hospital. And then one of the questions that I was surprised or that made me wonder was, so I asked him, so like if a patient comes to you guys, like how are you guys able to chart review things? And he was like, what do you mean by chart review?
Yeah.
Like, go through his chart, see where he was before this, if he did like a visit before that. And I think one of the things that I didn't realize was that over here, in order for you to get into or to find or to be seen by a specialist, you have to be seen by a general practitioner first. And I think in the Philippines, you just go straight to a specialist. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I mean, I've never experienced, I forget how it is, but so that's why he told me, he was like, well, there's too many cooks trying to cook a recipe, and there's no one person trying to lead everyone. And so I feel like that's a really big difference because over here you have one PCP, the PCP coordinates everything, talks to all of your specialists. That way, if a patient ever gets admitted to us, we can kind of talk to the specialist, be like, hey, so what is this patient currently on medicine wise? How has the patient been, or how was the patient during his annual checkup? Whereas when I was telling this to my friend, he was like, well, like we just have to trust them. If they tell us they're taking this list of medications, we just have to trust them and go with it. And I'm like, oh, isn't that dangerous?
Yeah, I have to say, in terms of like charting and keeping a record of all of the medical, all the medications of a patient and their history and things like that, it's definitely not as we're definitely not there yet where we've reached the point of using electronic, like store like to store information just the way you guys are doing here in the States. And I don't know about you, but when I was a clerk, I would do um, abstracts and things like that. We would all have to like handwrite every single detail, like the history from the time that the patient was admitted to the time that they get discharged. Nothing, we never used our laptops. And if we did, it would just like take so much time. And that's what we dreaded so much as clerks. But you're right when you said that in the Philippines, you go directly to
List.
right, a specialist. And here I don't know if it has something to do with insurance here in the US, but you definitely don't need to or don't get directed to a specialist right away. And that really blew my mind when I first came here for an appointment. And I was like, you got to see like surprised because you got to see like the GP first, and then if you need further care, then that's when we refer you to a specialist. And I was like, can you just give me like straight to the specialist and we can like you know, get things done. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
huge difference.
I feel like there's pros and cons for that. Like pro is that, if like medicine, you graduated from medical school, so you kind of know where you need to go to.
Right,
It's faster and it's like, oh, I'm going to avoid paying this much if I see like a GP or a general practitioner because I already
right,
know what's wrong with me. At the same time, it's it's better if you actually have a primary care physician, like I said, especially with the chronic patients, because then there's someone coordinating the care for that patient and then just like distributing the work and saying, hey, you see this patient, tell me what the plan is for that patient right now. That way, if ever that patient gets hospitalized, then the hospital can just call me, update me, or give me updates about this patient, and then I can disseminate the information to
right.
the next, which is a lot better if you think about it in terms of patient care because it's more organized.
Absolutely. And yeah, I really love that you brought up all those points and the main differences between healthcare here in the US and in the Philippines. Those are all like a lot of things that not a lot of people think about. So we move on now to some of the questions that my followers had sent in. And since we're talking about your experience in clerkship and medical school, did you ever ask for letters of recommendations from any of the physicians that you rotated with in the Philippines to use for match, or did you use them exclusively or get those LORs exclusively from here in the US?
So the thing with me is, I kind of didn't follow the timeline that everyone's trying to follow or trying to do, where they graduate from med school, take a year off to finish everything, and then apply directly. So what I did was I took a little bit longer than most of people. So I couldn't ask, or I felt like it wasn't right to ask letters of recommendations from my previous preceptors in the Philippines just because of that gap in between. Because I mean, it's been a while since they last saw me. So I thought it would be better if it was a recent doctor that I worked with. That way, whatever that person was going to write on my letter of recommendation was more accurate and was more up to date.
Gotcha. And do you, in your opinion, Maureen, do you think you need to be at the top of your class to go for the USMLEs?
No, I absolutely don't think so. There's a lot of people from my class. We didn't graduate top 10, top 20. I think what you need, if you really want to pursue USMLE or residency in the States, is you just need to be hardworking. And then you just need to be very driven because it takes a lot of sacrifice just going through all these processes, like taking step one, step two, step three, or step to CS, CK, whatever, if that's,
Yeah,
but yeah, and then finding LORs. You don't need to be the smartest person. You just need to be the most driven or very driven. And then you just need to be able to um, work through the challenges and just be very strong and hardworking because you're not just going to be handed a residency or a match. You have to work for it.
I absolutely agree. I think, especially as IMGs, we always kind of go into this thinking that we need to be the smartest person
The
in the
smartest.
class, which I never believed that because I feel like you could also be the smartest person but not really have the, I guess, like you need to be resilient too when you're
Mhm.
doing the USMLEs because there are going to be a lot of roadblocks along the way, especially as an IMG. I'm finding that out now, and I'm only done with step 2 CS, and I'm still doing preparations for step 1, and there's already so many things that are happening. And yeah, I just, like you said, you really need to be hardworking. And before we talk more about like clerkships and internships and the and more about your experience in the Philippines, I wanted to just clarify because a lot of people probably don't know the system in the Philippines is so different. um, Internship in the Philippines is like sort of considered our 5th year of medical school, but not really. It's a postgraduate training that we have, and wherein we go through a full year of doing rotations in all the departments. And then after that, that's when you take your licensure exam, and then you do residency. Whereas here in the US, when you say internship year, it's your first year of residency. That can get really confusing. And I was confused when I first came here. I was like, I haven't done residency. I did internship, but not residency. But yeah. So Maureen, I know that UE has ties with some hospitals here in the US. Was it ever an option for you to kind of do clerkship here in the US while being a student in UE?
So before I answer that question, one of the things that I wanted to add to the question that you had asked me earlier, which I tell some of my friends who are in the process of applying for residency here or just going through the process of USMLE, I always tell them, you don't need to be the smartest person. You just have to be able to work hard so that you can study for it. Because, like if you want to get a good score, you can always just like spend more time trying to study or learn something. But then once you actually get to the process of interviews and trying to match,
Oh gosh.
it's different. Like I've seen so many people who are so smart, so book smart, like they can score 250s on their USMLEs or 270s on their. I know it's like, and I'm just like, what? How do you guys even do
I
that?
know.
But then once they do the interviews, they have a hard time connecting to people. And so that's one of the edge that people who feel like they're not smart enough, that's something that you guys can work on because you don't need to be super smart. You just need to find what your strength is and work on that. That way you could use that to your advantage once you get interviews. So like for me, I'm not the smartest person, but I know I'm very chatty and I'm very talkative. So I used that when I was interviewing with people. I talked to the residents, tried to really befriend them. That way, they really saw that I was interested in their program. So that's just something for you guys to keep in mind. You don't have to be smart. You just have to be very personable. And then your second question. So yes, UE, we were fortunate enough during my time because we were given the option to either do 3 months of clerkship in the US or do 6 months, which is the maximum. I think recently they changed that. I think you're now only allowed 3 months maximum to do clerkship in the US. But for us, we had the option to do it either in New York or Chicago. And then I think with USD, you had to find the program or a program that would accept you guys. For us, we just had like a point person who we paid and then
Right.
submitted all our paperwork to, and then they fixed everything for us. But the thing is, with UE, for example, I think pediatrics, because that was one of the rotations that I did in the US, because I knew I wanted to do peds. They only offered it in Chicago, but not in New York. So it was a little bit harder for those people who wanted to do surgery and also peds as a US rotation, because then they had to go to New York first or go to Chicago first and then transfer over to the other state or that was offering that specific rotation. But yeah, we were fortunate enough because there was a point person to fix everything for us, and
Right.
it wasn't hard for us to individually find programs that would accept us.
Right. And I remember because I did my psych rotation as an intern in UE, actually. I think it was only 2 weeks, but I really enjoyed the experience that I had there. And I know some people, or at least I came across some people who were planning on going at that time to Chicago and things like that. So I just thought it was pretty amazing that UE has that system where they support a lot of Filipino Americans who go to the Philippines for medical school and kind of give people that opportunity to rotate here in the US. So you mentioned earlier, Maureen, that you did not follow the timeline that everybody kind of follows. And so tell me a little bit, if you're okay with sharing, how did you gain like US clinical experience after coming from the Philippines? Did you introduce yourself as an IMG, or did you just say, I'm interested to rotate, or how was that like?
So I graduated 2015. I didn't stay for internship, like the Philippine internship,
Right.
because originally I felt pressured because everyone else in my class who were IMGs at that time are basically Filipino Americans who were going to go back here to the US. They were already starting to talk about USMLEs, their timelines. And then at that time, I was like, crap, like I haven't figured anything out yet. I didn't even know I had to like submit all this paperwork in order for me to take the exam. So like right before I left the Philippines, I rushed all the paperwork, submitted my USMLE application without even realizing or doing my research on what like USMLE step one was. So I just was like, okay, I'm gonna submit the paperwork. That way I can take the USMLE step one by December. 6 months should be fine studying for the step one. Who was I kidding? That is absolutely not true. Especially given the fact that like I have very bad test anxiety. I get scared anytime like I'm taking standardized tests. So I didn't take that into account. So basically what happened to me was I kept just like comparing myself to where other people were, especially like people who graduated with me because they were doing internship, right? And they were so busy being so productive doing internship. And here I was sitting in my room trying to study for step one. And I couldn't help it. I couldn't help but compare myself to these people. And I always felt bad because I was like, I'm not being productive. Like, I should be doing this. I should be doing that. I should be expanding my medical knowledge. But here I am trying to study for an exam. And so me having that mentality for the first year actually pushed me behind further. And so what happened was graduated 2015, kept pushing my step one because I was just like, well, I still have time to do this. And so I really didn't take my steps until I think mid 2017. And then in that time, or during that time, like what you said, I enjoyed my time,
Of
not being
course.
like, graduating from med school. I felt like, this is the only time that I'll have
It's
for
the best
myself.
feeling.
Yeah, like enjoying life basically, because, like as a med,
Exactly.
you're just so held up trying to pass all of your classes and you don't really get to enjoy life. And so that first year was allotted to just me enjoying life and just having the freedom to do whatever I wanted to do. And then the following year, so 2016 is when I actually started buckling down. My mom is a nurse. So when my parents moved over here and we finally decided to stay here, my mom was a nurse, or my mom switched from being a doctor to being a nurse. And so she knew a couple of doctors. And so I talked to my mom. I was like, hey, do you think that they'd be able to take me in for an observership? Unfortunately, a lot of the doctors that my mom was working with were mostly university based and they were hospitalists. So, in order for me to do an observership with them, we had to go through the university, pass a bunch of paperwork.
Right.
And so, there was only one doctor who actually was able to help me out. But then the other observerships that I had, really, it was just basically trying to find on that DTTS Facebook page, trying to find
Yes.
people who were already in residency, asking them, even though I didn't know them, asking them and introducing myself, saying, hey, I'm Maureen, I'm an IMG. I'm also very interested in going through the match. I was wondering if you guys could help me out. Like I was trying to find observerships. So basically, in terms of Filipino, like makapal yung mukha ko that time, I just asked
You
because I was
need to be.
I was like, you know what? Like everyone went through the same process.
Exactly.
All of us at one point prior to matching needed a lot of help. And so I felt like they knew where I was coming from. And in fact, there was a USD resident at that, or USD graduate who was already a first year resident at that time. Her name's Tina Villanueva. I don't know if you know
I've heard
her.
of, no, I
And
think
she
I've
was a great
connected with
help.
her before. She's really sweet and super helpful.
She's super sweet. She's super helpful. The only ties I had with her was that we both went to the same high school, which is Miriam. And so I introduced myself, asked her for a bunch of help, and she was absolutely amazing. She helped me out and she told me, hey, like, what if you just like ask like the small clinics? Because as an IMG, you're under the impression that you need university-based LORs,
Right.
which is true. Any LOR, as long as it's strong enough, which is what she told me, as long as it's strong enough, as long as it actually talks about you as a person will work. And so I did that. I contacted clinics near my house because I live in Houston. One of the doctors that I rotated with is Filipino, and so she was the one who introduced me to other doctors. And so that's why it's important not to be shy. Just ask for help because we all need help. And that's basically how I gained observership or LORs in the process. Um, I don't think I ever needed to pay for any of them. I know some people are paying thousands of dollars for
Yes.
US clinical experience. In my case, I had two university based LORs. One was from one of my mom's good friends who's a doctor in California. The other one was from a rotation I did in New York with Mount Sinai. It was with a cardiologist. The only reason why I got that rotation was because that the secretary who works for that cardiologist is also Filipino. So I'm telling you, it's like as long as you find Filipinos, you're good to go. Just ask for help, and everyone's always going to be more than willing to help you out. Just don't be afraid to ask. I mean, the worst that can happen is they'll say no.
That's the beauty of it. I think I love that you talked about that in detail because I personally would say that I also wasn't at the top of my class when I was in medical school, but I can confidently say that I do work hard. I'm not book smart, that's for sure. But I think it really helps to kind of get out of your shell and talk to people and put all your shame aside. And like you said, you got to have thick skin to actually
Mhm.
survive the USMLEs and actually don't really need to care so much about what people say. Just ask. I like to think, and I've said this before on my channel and some videos that like if I think that as long as you something like I think as long as you don't ask, I feel like the answer is always going to be no. And
Mhm.
you can always keep telling yourself that you're not good enough for something, and then you end up just not getting anywhere. So I love that all of these connections that you made were through fellow Filipinos or people that, you know, your mom knew, or you just never know.
Mhm.
So I love that.
It was a big blessing. That doctor that I was talking about, who my mom knew here, it was such a big blessing to me because that doctor that I ended up rotating for like a week with, who gave me an LOR, is actually one of the faculty members in the hospital where I'm working at right now. So
What?
yeah, so it was my top choice. And I think she really made a big difference because she wrote one of my letters of recommendation, and she's a well known faculty member in that hospital. So I feel really lucky. A lot of people told me that, oh, it's easier for you because, you're a US citizen. It's a
Right.
lot. So I always felt bad every time people use that against me because I always thought, well, like we're all IMGs. I'm still putting in the same amount of effort that you guys are putting in. And so sometimes, like, especially for the US citizens who are IMGs, don't ever let anyone tell you or belittle your hard work or the hard work that you've already put in because you're still an IMG. You're still putting in the same amount of work. So don't ever feel bad about being a US citizen, people comparing their situation with yours. It sucks whenever someone says that. But yeah, so like for all the IMGs out there, just don't be afraid to ask. I think like I've had a couple of people message me on Facebook asking for like a list of the programs that I applied to, and I don't mind giving them out to other people. And like I appreciate it when people actually introduce themselves first and say, "Hey, I'm this and that." Like I think there's like in order for you not to appear like you're just a user or you're using,
Right.
well, you just
Yeah.
have to remember that introduce yourself first.
Build
Say, "Hey,
rapport.
yeah, like don't be direct and be like, hey, can you give me this? Because it's like,
Exactly.
oh, you only want that from me. But yeah, just like introduce yourself and like always say thank you. Like thank you isn't the hardest phrase to say. And that's really all like we need, just knowing that, oh, this person's thankful for my help. That's good enough for me. I don't need anything else from you. Just remembering people who help you along the way is also important.
I agree. I think it's so easy, especially when you're kind of asking somebody from behind the screen or you're just typing a message to someone you don't know personally. It's easy to kind of take advantage of that person without being malicious. It's just sometimes the culture that we have is just like, okay, I'll ask this person, they'll probably answer, and then I don't need to like build a connection with this person any longer. But I think etiquette is really important when you're trying to build connections too. And I wanted to. So you talked a little bit about like taking a break, and I know for those of you watching and listening, Maureen mentioned that she did her OBGYN rotation in Quirino, which I also did, and it was, I think, one of the, I would say, best and worst experiences, because that's, in my experience at least, we had like rotations where with Kirino, we did like 24-hour shifts and we were standing the whole time, sometimes did not have any time to eat or sit because the patients are just like constant and constant. But I really think that that was the best hands-on training I have ever received. And I think one main difference also that I forgot to mention earlier between the Philippines and here is that you're kind of more allowed to be more hands-on with the patients in the Philippines. And I think that has to do with like all the government hospitals and right. But yeah, so we have a question from somebody who's also from UE. Her name's Nikki Bautista. And then she was asking, what are some of the extracurricular activities you did while you were in medical school? And it, like, apart from that, how were you able to build a CV that you felt you could present to program directors?
So I wasn't the most active as a med student because, like I told you, med school enough was like a struggle for me because
Yeah,
I graduated undergrad here. And so undergrad here, your graduation is basically end of May. And then medical school in the Philippines at that time started June. So I didn't have
right.
any break in between undergrad and going to med school. So I was just like exhausted from everything. And my first
Yes.
ever break was that summer after freshman year. I remember crying so many times as a first year med student and just saying, I'm going to quit. Like, I'm going to say goodbye to medicine. Like, I can't take this. But so it, like my first year, I didn't do anything. I wasn't part of anything. I just stayed at home, slept whenever I could. Second year, one of my good friends, Michelle Alano, who's already a surgery resident at PGH, um, she was always super active in extracurricular activities. So she was part of a dancing crew. She was part of, I think, the football team. Um,
Wow.
yeah, she was always active. Prior to med school, I actually knew her because we go way back. We went to the same high school and we were both in the same cheerleading team. So second year, she really encouraged me. She was like, you know what? Like you always just stay at home. You don't do anything. You know, what kind of a friend are you? You need to be doing something with me. So we could have our own little thing. And so she guilt tripped me at first, which eventually really worked out because so we both joined the Cruciate team, which is like the dance team in UE. We
Oh,
competed every,
wow.
I don't know if you've heard of it, like the Med Rhythm or Med Group.
Yes, yes.
So we were both part of it. I did that for, I think, 2 years because my clerkship or my last year I wasn't able to do it because I was in the States. But yeah, so we did it for 2 years. And that was one of the things that I did, which honestly I put on my CV because I was like, anything I did in med
Of
school, I
course.
did there. The other thing is in UE, one of the fraternities, the bigger fraternities, they always have circumcision admissions.
Yeah.
And so I always tried to join that as much as I could. So that was another thing that I put on my CV. The other thing is in UE, if you're doing your surgery rotation, especially since we do it in Among Rodriguez,
Yeah.
sometimes they'll actually be pulled out of that hospital and do med missions. And I think it was Valenzuela, one of the cities, yeah, the
Right.
Barcelona. So I put that in there. Anytime I left the UE system and did a med mission, I always
Oh
put that
yeah.
in there. And then even some things, so I remember when I was a freshman in med school in UE, we had that big storm. It wasn't, I forget what it was,
Ondoy?
but basically, what's that?
No, I can't remember. There's so
It,
many typhoons in the
yeah,
Philippines.
I know. I don't know if it was Undoy, but there was one before that that was really bad too, but I wasn't there. So it was the one in either 2011 or 2012. But it was really bad because our school got flooded. We were out of class for an entire week. And so I wasn't part of our student council committee, but then I had friends who were a part of it. And so I helped them in terms of like collecting food to donate to people in that area who were affected by it. And I put that on my CV. That was like a service or social service that I did.
Absolutely.
Yeah, any volunteer work that I did, I took advantage of it and put it on my CV. In college, I was part of a sorority and I was VP service for it. So I always liked doing volunteer work. And so coming back to the US after I graduated, I got myself involved with my sorority again and tried to be part of any service events that they did. And so I put that on my CV as well. Anything I did in college that I felt like could help boost my application, I also put that in there.
Okay.
Um, really, anything that you do outside of medicine, put it on there because it's going to help you out.
Yeah, and to anybody who's listening, if you're currently a medical student in the Philippines, especially, there's so many volunteer opportunities. So take advantage of as many as you can. And if you're an IMG from a different home country, do that as well. I feel like there are a ton of opportunities that you can take advantage of when you're there. So, Maureen, I have a couple more questions for you before I let you go. But I really wanted to know your answer to this. What is life like post match?
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, wonderful in the sense that I'm not as pressured in terms of studying for like step in order to secure a career. Because I think as an IMG, prior to match, that's one of the worries that you have. It's like, I'm in this period where I don't know exactly what I'm doing with my life. It's like,
Yes.
will I match? Will I just be stuck here and have wasted so many years trying to get into match? So that was one of my biggest fears coming into the match. And so now that I'm actually on the other side, it feels absolutely wonderful. It's like delayed gratification. Um, you know, it's still hard because as a resident, there's different responsibilities now, and you're actually practicing to be a doctor. And
Right.
someone else's life is in your hands. You have to make the decisions versus if you were a clerk or if you were still in med school, you'll make suggestions, make plan suggestions, but that's not exactly, sometimes it's what they're going to do, but it's not, like you have more room for to, well, people are more forgiving basically in terms of
Right.
like if you make mistakes, but as a resident, you just have to be completely careful with what you do now. But in terms of like the anxiety and the weight, completely gone. I'm just like,
Ugh, I can't wait to get there.
that's what I keep telling people, it's tough at first. You'll feel discouraged because you don't know, like, it's like you're second guessing yourself. There's so much
Yes.
self-doubt. You don't know if you're going to be good enough. But then once you actually get to that point, it's like a big sigh of relief, and everything that you've been working hard for, it all pays off. It's like, okay, now I understand why I had to spend 12 hours sitting in front of a computer studying for step one, because it's definitely worth it.
My
And
heart is racing just like thinking about imagining the feeling that you're feeling right now or that you felt when, post match and matching, you're just like, oh, by step one, by step two, all those feelings. It's just like,
it was crazy because right before I even found out I matched, a lot of things were running in my head. I was like, what if I don't match? Like, what's going to happen to me? I'm already going to be what, like 4 years out of med school and I'm still not in a residency program, like what am I going to do? Should I still continue? Should I just like find another job? But like by this time it's too late because I'm too old. So like those are the questions that were running inside my head. But then once I actually got that email, I was like, oh my God, like
Did you cry?
I did. I like was screaming. My sister, I remember, so we had this group, so the match 2019, because I matched 2019. We had this small WhatsApp group of all like the IMGs from the Philippines. And so people were already starting to text us on that group chat saying, hey, you know, like the email's out, we match, blah, blah, blah. And I remember holding on to my phone and I'm like, I still don't have like an email.
Oh my goodness.
And I remember like, ugh, the worst thing you could ever possibly do to yourself is check forums because
Right.
people are
Oh
so
my gosh.
competitive. They'll
Yeah.
like, excuse my French, but they'll like mind fuck you
Yes.
so
I
much.
agree. I agree.
So don't ever like read any of those forums. None of it is true. So I remember going through it and I was like, oh my God, one of the people or one of the comments here says that if you don't get an email exactly at this time, that means you didn't match. And so I was like, crap, like I didn't match. Like that was my first time applying, right? And I was like, crap, I didn't match. And so I was just like, oh man, like I need to prepare myself emotionally, mentally. And then all of a sudden, like someone from that group said, well, if you haven't received an email, what you can do is go directly to the portal system, I think, and like it'll say on there that whether or not you matched. And so that's what I did. I went on there and like I was trembling. I had my phone and I was near my stairs and I was like just trying to check it. And then once I saw you matched, congratulations, you matched. I started bawling my eyes out, started screaming, and I felt like my legs were going to give up just because it just felt so good to finally have reached your dream and to have all that hard work pay off. So don't be discouraged.
I'm
You
getting
know, you guys
tingles,
will get.
Maureen. Your story.
No, you're fine. Like that's exactly how I felt. Like, you know, it's so easy to feel discouraged
Absolutely.
prior to matching because you know, like we are our own biggest critics and we always
Yes.
try to put ourselves down. But, you know, just as long as you know that you're putting in the hard work, as long as you're praying really hard for it,
Oh yeah.
you will get there. And then you just have to be patient. Don't ever compare yourself to other people because, you know, all of us have different timelines. So that's one of the things that I actually learned going through this process because I used to compare myself a lot to my peers. And I was like, well, if they already match, I'm still here studying. That's useless. That's BS. Like, don't ever do that.
Oh my gosh, Maureen. I just have to say because I moved here to the to the U.S. from the Philippines, and then of course while I was studying, all my like my colleagues or my friends, they were already in residency while I was still kind of like what you said, stuck behind the desk in front of the computer. While everybody's like, especially on social media, they're posting things like wearing my white coat and first year of residency, and I'm just like, okay, I'm in front of a book. Like, what am I even no? What am I doing with my life? So I'm glad that you brought that up. So it's just so relatable and it makes me feel so much better listening to you talk about just being patient and not giving up because it's
Mhm.
very easy to get discouraged, especially when you're studying for the USMLEs can be very isolating, I have to say. I'm learning that the hard, yeah, I'm learning that the hard way. So I wanted to merge these two questions into one because I thought they were really good. So what were some of the difficulties when you first started residency that you experienced? And what do you think the white coat essentials are for residency?
Honestly, I asked, so prior to starting residency or intern year, when I found out that I was going to go to this program, I actually messaged one of the residents because that was one of the things listed on the first email that I ever got from them saying, hey, if you have any questions, just reach out to any of the residents. And so I had messaged one of them and asked them, hey, like, is there any book that I need to purchase, to read, to prepare
Yeah.
for? And the best advice that anyone ever gave me was you're in residency or you're going to be in residency. We don't expect anything from you. We don't expect you to know everything. And so that period prior to starting residency, enjoy your life, because once you're in residency, you won't have that much time to actually enjoy the things that you want to do. So, and plus, like, residency is where you learn stuff. You're never going to be fully prepared coming into residency, no matter how many books you read, because the cases, the patients that you'll actually see is so different from what you learn in textbooks. Like, like for example, Kawasaki disease, they always tell us, oh, it's fever, that strawberry tongue, and
Yeah.
then the red eyes. But then I've seen a lot of patients who just had like a high fever, didn't have any of the other symptoms. And then when you get their labs, that's when you find out, oh crap, it's Kawasaki. So, like it's something that you just have to go through. It's okay if you read certain books just to brush up on things, but don't
Right.
ever feel pressure to know everything. Um, we don't expect anything from you. Same thing with the interns that I have right now. They always feel scared. They're like, oh, what do I have to read for this? And what do I have to prepare for? I'm like, as long as you take the initiative to do work, as long as I don't have to like constantly remind you to do certain things because you're hardworking and you take the initiative to do work, that's all I need from you. As long as you show up to work every single day, I don't need for you to be the smartest, because I don't know anything. Like, to be honest, in the unit, I still walk around and I tell the nurses, hey, I'm dumb. I don't know anything. So help me. It's always good to be humble and to know
Yeah.
that, you don't know everything. So with the incoming, or for those who are going to match, if you're scared about that, about not knowing anything, it's okay. It's okay to feel that way. That's a normal feeling. If you want to brush up on things, go ahead, read your basics, but don't ever feel so pressured coming into residency thinking that you have to know everything and you have to be on top of everything. It's something that you'll just learn and like easily adapt to as you go through residency. And I think the other question you asked was, which one
The
was that
white
one
coat
again?
essentials and the struggles that you had when you were like in your first year of
Oh,
residency.
so it wasn't that big of a struggle, because I had people who were very supportive, who helped me along the way. But like I said, like I mentioned earlier, in the Philippines, we don't have the EMR system. And then even in the rotations that I did, during observership, every hospital, every clinic has their own different EMR
Right.
system. You have Epic, you have Kronos, you have all those other stuff. And so for us, we use Epic, and I've never used Epic before, but during orientation, they teach you how to like manipulate it, how to like play with it around. And so initially, that was one of the things that I found hard, because I was like, I'm not used to this. I'm just used to like writing
Right.
everything on paper. But, it's something that you'll get a hang of eventually. The other thing that I thought was really hard was, like I said, removing that mindset or that mentality in my head where I I feared my seniors or I feared my faculty members, because that's how I was trained in the Philippines, that out of respect comes fear as well. But here it's like I needed to retrain my brain and actually be comfortable enough to approach the attendings and ask them, hey, like, could you help me out? I don't understand this, because
Right.
they understand that you're in residency and that you're here to learn. So they actually like it more when you ask questions versus you just pretending like you know what you're doing and then messing the whole thing up. So it's like taking that mentality off was one of the hardest things for me, because I was so used to something completely different.
I'm laughing right now as you talk about that because like that was exactly the way I felt when I was in the Philippines in medical school and even like as an intern and clerk because I was too scared to ask and I was worried, especially if you're asking in front of your peers and in front of a crowd and you don't the last thing you want to hear from your attending or your consultant the way we address attendings in the Philippines you don't want them to say why are you asking me that? You're supposed to know that by now. You're
Mhm.
already an intern. You already graduated medical school. Why are you asking me that? Yeah, that's happened to me several times. So after that, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna nod my head and pretend that I actually understand. Um, yeah,
I
it's
think at the
horrible.
end of the day, once you're in residency, you actually, because of that responsibility that, someone else's life is in your hands now, or you're responsible for someone else, it's like there's always a voice at the back of your head that keeps telling you, hey, you know what, this is patient care. You
Right.
need to be careful. And so even if you feel so embarrassed to ask a stupid question, end
Yes.
up still asking it because you don't want your patient to get in trouble. And I think that's very good. So don't ever feel embarrassed if you have that voice at the back of your head. In fact, you always have to have that voice at the back of your head. So like with the attendings right now, like I think that's for anyone who's coming into residency here, that's one of the things that you'll actually learn to appreciate. Most programs here, they know that the faculty's job is to teach you guys in order to prepare you once you're done with residency. And so they'll actually be the first people to say, hey, do you have any questions for me?
Right.
Do you understand what I'm trying to teach you guys? Or do you understand why we chose this and that? And it's like, as you get more used to them asking you that question, you'll be like, oh, okay, it's not bad to ask questions. So
Yeah.
sometimes I'm just like, quickly, like, so why did we do this instead of this versus like just keeping mum? Because then,
Yeah.
it helps you understand the thought process of each patient or each faculty because they're all different. And so
Right.
it'll help you kind of figure out how you want to go about each patient. So
Yeah.
always
And
ask.
you need to be makulit at first, especially. That's like you need to show, I think it's a way of showing that you're enthusiastic about learning and that you don't, it's okay to make mistakes now. They always say that, right? Like during residency, because you're in training. So better that you kind of like make mistakes now with the guidance of the attendings, as opposed to doing it when you're actually doing your own practice. And unfortunately, it still happens with attendings where they make mistakes, human error, it still happens. So last question, Maureen. What if like, is there anything that you like, if you go back in time, is there anything that you would like to change about anything?
Probably I should have taken my step 3 prior to residency, but at the same, because it's like it's hard trying to figure out like or find a time to actually study for step 3. So that's one of the things that I'm having a difficult time with right now. But at the same time, looking back, you know, right before I started residency, I actually went back home to the Philippines, spent time with my friends, and to me, that was so good. It was such an amazing feeling because I got to relax and actually mentally and emotionally prepare myself before residency. So if you're able to fit in step 3 before residency, go for it. But also make sure that you make time to just relax and unwind prior to residency because it's going to be a big transition once you're actually in residency and you need to be like prepared for it.
Absolutely. Honestly, guys, I can talk to Maureen all day, every day about this because this was such a fun conversation. And I know a lot of the people that watch these videos are fellow Filipinos. So, guys, share the video with our talk with Dr. Maureen here, and I'm sure it'll help a lot more people and benefit people who are also on that same route. So, thank you so much for joining me today, Maureen. I really appreciate it.
And to those who are interested in pizza, you guys can always message me. I'm on Facebook. Just like message me or even like on Instagram, message me and ask me anything because like I said, I've been there. I know exactly what you guys are going through and I'd be more than happy to kind of pay it forward because I also got so much help when I was in your position.
Are you open to me leaving your links in the description box? Okay, I'll do that. So you guys heard it from Maureen. She's more than willing to answer your questions, especially if you're interested in pediatrics. So that about wraps up today's episode of the IMG series. I'm Christina, and I will see you in the next episode.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.